Hi, how you doing? In this video, I may well really annoy you. Or, well, maybe not. Over the last few years, I've made a number of videos about HEMA and some of the problems I can see, whether it's the general lack of athletic ability, the technical skill level, or the problems with the way it's generally practiced and taught. These have stirred a little controversy, and yet I do stand by everything I've said. I've been involved with this modern HEMA revival for as long as pretty much anyone, and I still have a lot of love for it. I'm even starting teaching it again, and so when I talk about the issues I see, I need you to understand that it comes from a place of love. That sounds really crappy, doesn't it? Like this is some kind of intervention. Well, maybe it is. Anyway, let's not get distracted and wander off on a tangent just yet. I've been thinking a lot on this subject recently, partly because of a few comments people around me who are still heavily involved in the HEMA scene have made. More on that later. And partly because if I'm going to start teaching again, I want to make sure I'm not just slotting back into what I perceive to be a fairly heavily flawed approach. I'm going to do something I don't normally do now, and something you rarely see people in HEMA do at all. I'm going to admit I was wrong. I was wrong. Well, kinda. Many years ago, I made a video asking the question about whether it was possible to learn a system of fighting from books. I argued pretty strongly that it was indeed possible if you had the right approach. While I'm not outright saying that that was completely wrong, I am saying that I didn't put any of the fairly important caveats in place that I now believe. It depends on the books themselves. And it also depends on what level of skill we perceive to be a sign that someone has learned a system. Let me explain. We can split HEMA sources into two main groups. Those that describe the principles of a system of combat and use a few examples of techniques to illustrate that system. And those that are a collection of techniques from which we can hope it's possible to infer a system. In essence, it's the difference between learning to play a bunch of tunes on a piano or learning the theory behind how a piano works and what makes music pleasant to listen to. The former gives you a superficial appearance of being a good pianist, and is, in fairness, a lot easier and less time-consuming to do, but the latter is what actually makes you good. Sadly, I think that due to the nature of a lot of the sources we study in HEMA, we have an almost irresistible tendency towards this collection of techniques as an analogue of a complete art. I've lost count of how many seminars and classes I've been to over the years in HEMA where I've simply been shown a selection of moves with no real underpinning theory, no detailed understanding of the why, just the how. This is why when sports fencers come into HEMA they tend to do really well. They already have a lot of the understanding of why things work, and so when given new techniques they can use that understanding to do surprisingly well, surprisingly quickly. It's why some of the most experienced and most knowledgeable HEMA wrestling or grappling instructors still just show a bunch of moves, and even write off some of the things we see in manuscripts as being too simple or not particularly worthwhile. It's why when people with a decent background in wrestling or jiu-jitsu get involved, they tend to do really well too. And because the number of systems that are not a lot more than a collection of techniques vastly outweigh the ones that try to provide a conceptual understanding, that's what we tend to have in HEMA. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the way we study HEMA and the way we teach it can lead to an understanding of fighting and ability to fight, but only to a point. I was chatting to a good friend recently about the HEMA competition scene, and they said that the reason they were losing their enjoyment of it was how predictable it was. It was the same people fighting the same people, and with one or two very rare exceptions, everyone already knew who was better than who, and who would win. That it was a relatively quick process to hit your potential in HEMA, and once you were there, that's kind of where you stayed. That in effect, your ability with a sword was essentially natural, at least once you'd been taught the basics of a system. It's not an argument I'd have made myself, but the more I thought on it, the more reasonable a stance it seemed to be. Perhaps it isn't true, but if it were true, would anything look any different? It was this very conversation that got me thinking about whether the whole idea of recreating systems of combat from old books might be more flawed than I originally thought. That while it is clearly possible to gain a level of ability, perhaps that ability was never going to be anything more than that of a moderate or average sword fighter. I'd been mulling this over in my head for some time when someone else said something to me that brought it back into focus. It was another HEMA person who'd come along to my BJJ classes, and after a great session where they'd rolled with a fair few people, we were discussing one of them in particular. For the sake of this video, let's call them Bobby.
Bob.
Yes.
Well, Bob, Welcome on board.
They said to me that they'd had a great round with Bobby. Bobby was clearly much more skilled than them and had always been a step ahead whatever they'd done. The phrase they used was that it was like fencing against some of the really skilled tournament fighters in HEMA. Now the thing is, Bobby's a white belt. He's got a bunch of stripes, and would likely be a blue belt in a lot of places, but struggles a little for consistency and training. And this idea that a skilled white belt or early blue belt was essentially on a level with some of the best in the HEMA world kind of fell into place. And I was left speechless, because that's exactly what I'd have expected a fairly new white belt in BJJ would feel when rolling with someone who's around blue belt. But that's also how the person who's around blue belt feels when rolling with an experienced blue belt or an early purple belt. It's how I, as a purple belt, feel when rolling with brown or black belts. And suddenly the contrast between HEMA, where a couple of years training gets you pretty much as good as you're going to be, with only small refinements to be made, and Jiu-Jitsu, or catch wrestling, where 12 years in, I'm still overwhelmed by the vast amount of knowledge and ability I see in people more experienced than me. That contrast was shocking. I need to make it clear now that I'm not trying to run the systems down. I'm not saying that Fury or Lichtenau or whoever was no good, and that their systems don't work, or that studying HEMA is pointless. Far from it. There's nothing that makes grappling special, other than the depth of knowledge that exists. And that shouldn't be the big surprise it clearly was to me. Just that while we may think we have a good handle on a historical system of swordplay, in reality, we're at best a blue belt. And I hope that you, like me, don't find this off-putting, or feel that I'm insulting you and what you do. To me, it's inspiring. It means there's so much more we can do, so much more we can learn, so much better we can get. We just need to accept that it's the case, and put our arrogance aside and start learning all over again. So now I'm going to pass this over to you. What do you think? Do you agree that what we're doing in HEMA is still in its infancy, and that we still have such a long way to go? Or do you think I'm talking rubbish, and we've actually got it nailed? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely interested in what you think, and maybe consider supporting me on Patreon. That'd be amazing if you could. And to those of you still here, at the very end of the video, fight team!